Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Stuart Roden. I'm a commissioner on the Human Relations Commission. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have a wonderful discussion this afternoon, or late morning, early afternoon as we transition. Welcome to Riots, Racism, and Reconciliation, a town hall hosted by Scottsdale Human Relations Commission and the City of Scottsdale. On behalf of all my fellow Human Relations Commissioners, especially Commissioner Sojai, who helped out tremendously with putting this together, I'd like to welcome you. Today's event is a look back on major social events, including what our community witnessed during the 2020 Scottsdale looting and rioting, how this impacted us, and the changes we've seen or still need to be made. The conversation is designed to cover 3 sections and will be moderated by Dr. Joel Martin. Dr. Martin is a dynamic community leader and is president of Triad West, a global consulting and training firm, headquartered in Scottsdale, Arizona. For more than 20 years, she has assisted organizations in diversity and inclusion, transformational cultural change, team alignment, and workforce empowerment. She earned her PhD in communications, a master's degree in psychology, and admission into the Wharton Business School Society of Fellows. Dr. Martin has also served 2 terms on the City of Scottsdale Human Relations Commission, so we have that in common. Welcome, Dr. Martin, and thank you so much for moderating today.
Thank you, Stuart. It's a pleasure and an honor to be back with the HRC again. Thank you also to the City of Scottsdale for hosting this timely conversation as part of a Scottsdale Town Hall. Please now welcome Sharon Sinney, who will be my staff assistant along with Stuart, and will now review the guidelines for civil dialogue. First, before you begin, Sharon, Stuart, thank you so much for that very warm welcome. Sharon, you're on.
Thank you, Dr. Martin, and thank you so much, Commissioner Roden, and hello to the Scottsdale community. Many of you may be aware of some of these virtual dialogues and etiquettes. And before we begin, we want to make sure that you know that during the meeting, please keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking. And as a reminder, this is a recorded event and will be released for viewing. We are looking for a commitment to foster greater empathy during our town hall. And as a community space, we reserve the right to remove you from the discussion if you become disruptive. For the guidelines for our discussion, this is a virtual safe space for dialogue. We are listening actively, and we hope that we'll be open to the full spectrum of perspectives. We will also use the chat box to provide an inclusive opportunity to participate, as well as the opportunity to speak. For those of you who want to speak, staff will ask you to use the hand raising feature, and we will go in order as it comes up. You will be provided 2 minutes after the moderator engages with you with a prompting question. Thank you, Dr. Martin, and now I turn it back to you.
All right. Everyone, I want to make sure that you're aware that the raise hand feature is at the bottom of your screen. All right. Okay, so we're ready to go, everyone. I want us, my wish for today is that we use all the time that we have to have a diverse, inclusive conversation on these 3 important topics. I know there have been a lot of feelings that have come up. There have been a lot of thoughts, and I appreciate everyone who is on this webinar, Zoom, and live stream with me and the City of Scottsdale. So before we begin, before we begin with the other form of interaction that Sharon has coached us on, let's start with some audience interaction through a poll, okay? So please launch the first question. An audience, select the best answer and only choose one. So what brought you to this town hall today? Check 1. And number 2, as you can see, have you been personally affected by racial bias in Scottsdale? It's a very powerful question there. And when it comes to racial bias compared to other cities you have experienced, signify where you see Scottsdale being better, about the same, or worse. Okay, so when we have those responses complete, I understand that I'm going to be getting the results, and we will all share in those. So what are, do we have our results in yet?
Dr. Martin, we currently have 84% of people have voted. Would you like to end the polling?
If 84%, let's give them another couple of minutes, okay?
We've had some more people sign on, so it looks like we've had an end of the polling at this time.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Okay, what are the results, please?
What brought you to this town hall today? A friend, 0, curiosity, 9%, want to learn more, 65%, want to help, 26%. Have you been personally affected by racial bias in Scottsdale? Yes, 22%, no, 78%. And my experience was in the Metro Phoenix area, 0%. When it comes to racial bias, compared to other cities you have experienced, is Scottsdale better, 26%, about the same, 48%, and worse, 26%?
Well, we've got some work to do here in Scottsdale, and we've got some good news here also. So when we look at that very, very first question, what brought you to this town hall today? 91% of you seem like you are engaged and you want answers and you have questions and thoughts. So thank you very much for that report out. Could please, who gave us that report? I want to acknowledge people as we go along. That's important to me for being inclusive.
I'm
okay.
Bruce Wall.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Appreciate it. Okay, so we are now going to begin with the first part of this 3-part conversation that we're going to have, and those are the riots in Scottsdale. So for me, it was a really, really harsh time. And Sharon, I believe you're going to be showing us some of the videos recapturing those moments, some of those moments.
Yes, I am. I'm going to play 2 videos for us that are about 2 minutes long.
Thank you.
I just want to point out, Benjamin, real fast, that on the right side of your screen, you're looking at live pictures from Scottsdale where they have broken through the front doors of Scottsdale Fashion Square, which actually closed early tonight. And you can see people coming out with handfuls of merchandise. They actually closed them all early tonight for fear that something like this might happen. Benjamin, hold on for just a second. We want to go to Team 12's Rachel Cole, who's on the phone with us. Rachel.
Hey, Mark, as you guys have probably seen from Sky 12 overhead, the police presence is growing here in Scottsdale, right near Scottsdale Fashion Square Mall. The funny thing is that when you're driving around in the Old Town area, people are at bars, they're out at restaurants. It's unbeknownst to them what is actually happening over here. So this is a totally different protest, if you will, than what we saw last night and what you guys have been discussing regarding the downtown Phoenix protesters. What we're seeing out here in Scottsdale is a completely different story. Windows smashed everywhere from the Apple store to the P.F. Chang's to the piano store that's next to Sprinkled Cupcakes, a very popular shop. All of these shops very popular. And if you're in the area or you're familiar, visitors and locals alike know Scottsdale and know that we just really haven't seen anything like this in Arizona in recent years, if ever. And my photog and I are just trying to communicate a little bit to see where we're going to set up shop so we can get you guys some ground visuals safely. Obviously, we're dealing with a totally different type of crowd, and we have been advised by management to.
Thank you. All right, folks. That was 1 year ago. As you watched that video, what were the feelings that came up for you? And if you have something that you would like to share, you can put your hand up and we'll be recognizing you in the order in which your hand goes up. And this is, again, is a dialogue. This is not a one-way conversation. I'm a moderator, not a speaker in this moment. All right, so let me hear from you, please.
And as folks are coming up with some of their comments and questions, we have one more.
Thank you, Sharon.
Police officers there standing in front of Phoenix PD headquarters. And now here, this is a look from earlier tonight at Scottsdale Fashion Square when demonstrators there breached the Apple store. You see them there trying to get through the front door. They start hanging on the door, and eventually they get it open and they went through. This is just one of several businesses that we've seen hit in that area in the last hour and a half or so.
Yeah, my friend who is in that area said that they were hearing on social media today that some of the stores inside the mall, we did actually see them breach the doors and actually get in the mall, not just Apple, but some of the stores that they wanted to get into was Gucci and Louis Vuitton, two of the popular stores there in Fashion Square, trying to loot in there as well. And that's outside Neiman Marcus. Probably about an hour ago or so, you could see that they actually made their way into the store there. Then they ran around the corner, and then we saw them throw bricks through Crate and Barrel, and then they just made their way down Camelback and Scottsdale Road, just going from store to store.
We saw them hit Urban Outfitters, actually get into Urban Outfitters there. They tried P.F. Chang's. I don't know if they actually eventually got into P.F. Chang's, but basically systematically just going business to business, storefront to storefront, trying to get in.
All right. There you have it. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about these experiences? What are you experiencing now as you watch those two videos? Do we have any hands up?
We do not have any hands up. I would love to hear from Dr. Roden. Oh, here we go. We've got two participants' hands raised.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Could you recognize them for us? Okay.
Yes, we have Janice Shimukubo, and then we have Pam Palermo. Palermo. Thank you. Janice?
Janice, what's your thought?
Sorry, I was unmuting. Thank you. Well, my feelings were anger and frustration and sadness that this was all happening in our city, because I think better of our city. And as the days unfolded, I believe we saw that many of these perpetrators were not even from here. Mm-hmm. And so, the question is, was this just a ruse, or some type of opportunistic reason for somebody to do their damage? So that made me even sadder. But I believe that as the police reports unfolded, it turns out that most of these people were not even from Scottsdale. Many were not even from Arizona. And so that made me think that these riots, so to speak, in this riot in Scottsdale, really had nothing to do with any of the other racial justice, social justice issues that were going on in the country. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well said. Thank you for that comment, that perspective. Who was our second person, Sharon?
Next would be Pam. Go ahead, Pam.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. I guess shock that people would behave in that manner. Yet I find myself reeling that feeling in, that emotion in, to maybe perhaps try to get a different perspective and understand the cumulative effect of what had been going on in our country, in different parts of our country, that may have caused the people who were involved in the riots and the looting of Fashion Square to behave out of frustration and anger. And lack of leadership, or all these things that had been culminating, in my opinion, in our country that led to this kind of this burst of rioting. But I did notice in the first video, which I don't think I had ever picked up on before, that there were a lot of people in that crowd that were kind of hanging back. They appeared to, from what I could see, that they weren't quite sure if they should enter that store, even though the window had been broken open, and so that was interesting to me. So I think you have that dynamic too that's clearly going on when you have groups together like that. That it's, are you going to be a follower, or are you going to be a leader? But nonetheless, it is shocking to watch that, and shocking to think that that could go on, in this city. And I will disclose this fully. I am a newbie to the city of Scottsdale. I just moved here last March. So, being an outsider coming in, I too was shocked, even though I haven't been residing in this city. It was shocking to me that Scottsdale, Arizona would experience this.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. I would like to make a comment that is, and then I want to hear your thoughts, Stuart. The nights of protest were, well, I'll read it in this way. The Phoenix chapter of Black Lives Matter put out a statement on that Saturday night that it was not involved with the event at Scottsdale Fashion Square, and expressed concern for the safety of the participants. The 3 nights of protests in the Phoenix area were in response to the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis and other police killings. And they were concentrated in the central Phoenix area near the Phoenix Police Department headquarters, City Hall, and the state capitol. So I'm very clear on the distinction of riot and protest. All right, I hope that opens up the space for more conversation. Stuart,
And thank you. Dr. Martin, we have 2 other hand raised, and then I'll have Stuart as well.
Okay.
So we have Wendy, who will go next. Wendy?
Hi. I guess just what I was remembering was the curfews that were in place and how that felt, and conversations I had with some different friends about how curfews sent a different message to you depending on who you were, especially what race you are, because I think certain people have more fear of officers. And I had to drive somewhere after the curfew and fill gas, and I had a very open and honest conversation with my 2 white male children, and me being a white woman, about how if I weren't a white woman with 2 kids in the car with a real reason for going somewhere, I would have felt very unsafe about being out anywhere.
Understood. Thank you for your perspective, Wendy. Do we have another person?
We do. We do have Dr. Martin. We have Sue. Go ahead, Sue.
You might need to unmute, Sue.
Sue, are you available? I see your hand up. Okay, while Sue is getting, Sue, are you available?
All right, why don't we hear from Stuart now, and then we'll come back to Sue.
Perfect.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. I just had an observation, not so much a comment, but an observation. In watching that video for multiple times, both in preparation for this and when it originally happened, the thing that I want to ask is, when did the language transition from that of violence to riots? Because if you look at the ABC footage from the second video, the text on the bottom says violence in Scottsdale. And so what I really want to sort of, language matters, of course, and both of us know that, but everyone else knows as well. And so when we use certain words, what does that mean to the audience members when we say violence versus riots?
What's your take on it, Stuart?
I believe that there are certain dog whistles that are blown to put fear in people. And if we were to zoom in from the helicopters, from the news coverage, we would see that the percentage of people that were looting or damaging or wreaking havoc were, you know, some reports say that they were college students or high school students, or, you know, people that were pulled in by a particular YouTuber. And so, you know, there's melees and then there's actual violence and riots. And I believe that if this had been any other time other than right after this particular event of the killing of George Floyd, then I think it would just be, you know, kids damaging, you know, mall on a Saturday night, or, you know, kids doing stupid stuff on a Saturday night. It wouldn't have been tied into all the other events that were going on at the time.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that perspective. Appreciate it. Sue, are you with us? Did you want to come on into the conversation or give a new perspective? All right. Okay. So anyone, what were your thoughts about the experiences? I want to hear a couple more folks, if you don't mind, if you're up for just sharing it. And maybe question, were any of you possibly being part of the group that were in Old Town? Because my listening of that one video said that there were people, and also with the research that I was doing, there were people having dinner in Old Town and did not really know what was going on, or were not privy to being harmed or any other sort of interaction with what was going on in our area of the stores.
Dr. Martin, we have one hand up from Michael Clack. Go ahead, Michael.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to share real quickly. We had spent the day with my cousin who lives on the west side of the valley, and we were having conversations about George Floyd and some of the riots that had taken place, and how many times the riots are taking place in the community, the African-American community, and how things are torn up there, and it really hurts the African-American community. But we also said, you don't ever see anything where a riot may occur in Beverly Hills, for example. Well, lo and behold, on our way home that night, we first heard about the rioting taking place from our son. He was not in Scottsdale, but he was in Phoenix, and he was not participating in any riots. He was there as a protester, and he just wanted to see what was going on. And we were admonishing him to hurry up, get home, get off the street, because we don't know what would happen, which he did. Mm-hmm. But when we got home and we saw the videos on TV, I was shocked that it was actually happening in Scottsdale. And it was almost like we had prophesied about something that would happen in Scottsdale. Mm-hmm. And I was sad to see it, and for a number of reasons. I'm old enough to remember the riots of the 60s and the civil rights protests, mm-hmm. and the unrest that happened there. And it's history repeating itself is basically what it is, because people are not listening. And that was the main takeaway that I had for that. Thank you.
That people were not listening. Yeah. I just left another group conversation at one of our major businesses here, and there was a similar, not listening, a similar sense of frustration, and even with some people, a sense of hopelessness or helplessness. And then the whole conversation started shifting, as I suggest that we will together, as the 50 or so of us, we will, when we go through the 3 parts of this well-planned dialogue series by the Human Resources Commission, we'll ultimately get through this. And I want to make sure that we have all voices heard who want to speak to your feelings that you had during that time a year or so ago. They may or may not have been part of the rioting. Maybe it was part of the protest. I want us to open the space to have some conversations about what you were feeling at that point of time during that rioting, chaotic situation. So what were your thoughts? What stood out for you then during this turmoil, and what do you see going on now? What was then and what is going on now? Anyone have a thought on that, perspective?
Dr. Martin, we have one hand raised by Lisa Bishop. Lisa, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. And first of all, I just want to thank you for providing this opportunity, not only to hear what everybody else has to say, but also to add to the dialogue. I'm sorry, I'm kind of in a public place, so if it's too loud, let me know. But so my thoughts and experience during the time that this happened, honestly, I am hearing that people were surprised. I was not. Honestly, one thing I think that needs to be talked about is not necessarily the fact that it happened, is that we should be talking about why. Why did it happen? There were peaceful protesting happening all over the Phoenix area, but they chose to loot and riot in Scottsdale. So the question would be why? So I honestly was not surprised. Of course, during that time, I have Black sons, I have a Black daughter, and I've had to have countless conversations with them on how to be safe and how they need to interact whenever it comes to interaction with police officers, or really just kind of any type of interaction throughout the day. So honestly, in a way, I was happy that this was happening around the world. And it's about time that, unfortunately, that had to happen to George Floyd in order for this type of awareness and movement to begin. So I'm used to being fearful for my children. I'm used to having to deal with unconscious bias and racial discrimination. Used to it. I've seen rioting happen before. So I wasn't surprised that it happened in Scottsdale, but I was very happy that now there is social media provides a venue for these types of incidents to become public and to have more social awareness so that we can have change.
Okay. So, Lisa, are you speaking about the riots, or are you speaking about the protests, or are they part of the same thing for you?
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, so obviously, and I'll admit, whenever you have people that are trying to incite change, and they do so in a way of a peaceful protest, you're gonna get people who are gonna take advantage of that opportunity to loot and do things that are honestly just not appropriate. And I think that kind of comes with it, even though it's kind of one of those unintended consequences. But you gotta make your voice heard. So that's why we've got the peaceful protests. But I'm not at all happy about the riots or the looting. But like I said, it's just something that, almost kind of comes with it whenever you've got those people that choose to show how they feel in a different way.
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.
I got it. Scottsdale is internationally known for its fine resorts and spas and expensive restaurants and golf, art galleries, Old Town, the ritzy nightclubs, all of that. And it generally has an upscale reputation. So Pam, you're a new person to our community. I say welcome. And I can understand, Lisa, why you were saying you are not surprised. Scottsdale is a magnet for well-being. And for those, if I may add a few words on that, for those who may not have and want to have, there is great frustration. There is great inequities in our world, or in our nation for sure. And that riot may have been the outgrowth of some of that. Obviously, I have not interviewed anyone, and I'm speaking just from my heart to your heart. So I want to make sure that we have Is there anyone else that has something that they would like to contribute before we go on to our next area?
Dr. Martin, I have one hand up from Ladan Shojei, and I also want to remind the audience that you can also use the chat box where we will make sure we read what you have in there as well. So go ahead, Ladan.
One of the things I remember most happening for me is a fear of, I really was in a bubble thinking that Scottsdale was this place that, this type of thing doesn't happen. And I remember I lived in Los Angeles during the Rodney King riots, and the fear was, this is going to start hurting so many lives, not just the businesses being affected, but people dying. And I was pleasantly surprised at how quickly it also stopped. But it also really disheartened and made me sad to see why we couldn't just have a peaceful riot. I'm sorry, not riots, protests. Protests are important. They make a difference, and that part of it was very sad to see. But then, of course, the fear of what had happened before was definitely something I felt for a long time. So I see Scottsdale differently now.
Hmm. As a member of the Scottsdale community, and all of us who say we see it differently, what does that have? Is there a causal factor of wanting to do more, be better, have a Scottsdale for all? I know I'm leaping forward, Sharon, so pardon me. That's kind of, I want us to hold that question. And the work that I do with leadership, there's a comment, so what, now what? And you and I on this call, in this webinar on Facebook Live, we get to, if we choose to, think of ourselves as change agents. Where can we go with it? And keep that in your mind, because we've got 2 more areas to go through.
Dr. Martin, what's sad is if you look at what's happened since the riots that took place, we haven't seen much progress. We are now witnessing Asian hate crimes.
That's right.
And it's disheartening again to see that this isn't improving. Now, personally, my so what is I'm getting more involved. I'm trying to be an advocate for, the rainbow of human people that exists, and try to be a voice in it as much as I can. Mm-hmm. But it does kind of get you down when you kind of see, well, it happened to this group of people, but then it's happening again to another group of people. Like, when are we going to learn? When is this going to stop? I guess that's, I'm going to get off my rant.
Yeah, it's a good rant.
Dr. Martin, we have one hand raised by TJ. TJ, go ahead.
Let's hear PJ.
Good afternoon, and I'm very excited to be a part of this. I am a professional that works in Scottsdale in a leadership capacity, and I've experienced racism personally, not only in Scottsdale, but more specifically at work. During the time of the riots, what bothered me the most when I would hear my team members talk about, the protests, they would focus on the looters more than, really the basis of everything that was happening. And there is certainly a difference between the rioters, the protesters, and the looters. And there are not people thinking about, why are these people looting? What is the reasoning behind it? And let me also add that I am not okay or a fan of the looting, but I definitely took a step further to understand why that's happening. Why is there such a significant financial gap between Black people and people of color and other groups? So when they are doing this looting, yes, they're taking advantage of getting that designer clothes they can't afford. Yes, they're taking advantage of getting those electronics. No, it may not be right in the grand scheme of things, but when they're thinking about everything that has happened, they're angry, we're upset, they are frustrated. And so I challenge people who really are focusing on, why is this happening in Scottsdale? Focus on why it's happening, why these people are choosing to do this during this time. There's very rarely that injustice when these things happen, people go and peacefully protest. We are angry. This has been going on for far too long. And so there's this explosion of things that are happening. So it's not okay. But at the same time, I challenge people to really focus on the why. I am a co-founder of a group called Defeat Racism at Work, where we go around and we have conversations in the workplace, teaching race equity and also racism, how it impacts your workplace. And we share with those groups a video that came out right behind the death of George Floyd by a young lady named Kimberly Jones. It's called How Can We Win? And so she shares with people an in-depth look of what is really happening, the experience. And it is a very emotional video, and it is a very useful tool when you need a better understanding, a deeper look at what is truly happening. And so a lot of people are too surface, and I challenge you again to focus on, you know, not just why, but what are those reasons things are happening.
Yes.
Thank
there
you.
has been inequities at least for 400 years, PJ.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Tell us the name of the video again. I want to make note of it. Thanks for
It's
that.
called How Can We Win? And the young lady's name is Kimberly Jones.
Thanks, PJ.
You're welcome.
Awesome.
Dr. Martin, this would be a great time to transition to our next session. However, Dr. Roden wanted to say something before you transitioned, and we'll do another
I'm
poll.
not transitioning. We're already in it, Sharon.
Okay, perfect.
I don't do transition. We
I
are
love
in
it.
the flow.
There you
End
go.
scene, cut to the next scene. Really quickly, I just want to add to the discussion of, you know, what took place at Scottsdale Fashion Square versus what took place the week after. So my mind gets fuzzy a little bit as I age, right? So I had to look it up really quickly. But in the Phoenix New Times from June 7th, peaceful Scottsdale protest draws more than 1,500 people to Old Town. So there were peaceful protests, but we've only spent 80 to 90% of our time talking about, not just in this town hall, but in general in the public dialogue about the negative aspects that took place at Fashion Square Mall. And, you know, that bodes to your question, but the question of why, like, why is it that we didn't focus on the aftermath and the people that quote unquote did good by doing what everybody asked us to do? Well, you know, you need to peacefully protest, and that took place, but it gets lost in translation and discussion.
Mm-hmm. It's less sensational. It's good people doing good things for good cause.
Exactly.
Yeah, I hear you. All right. So let's talk about, you know, PJ kind of got us going into this, to the second R, racism. And racism is composed of biases, conscious and unconscious, and microaggressions and inequities and fears and frustration. And how do you feel, this is my question, do you feel Scottsdale is welcoming for all races and ethnicities in all parts of the city of Scottsdale?
And actually, Dr. Martin, we have a poll, so you can go ahead and launch that, and audience can complete it there. It's the same question.
All right, and then I'm going to bring it back live. Let's see the poll.
We'll just wait a little bit longer with 63% voting.
Mm-hmm. While we're waiting, can you tell me, Sharon, can everyone use the chat now?
Yes, I believe Kelly Corset was able to disable it, and we apologize to the audience for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
we have some results of the poll.
Thank you, Bruce. What do we have?
Do you feel Scottsdale is welcoming for all races, ethnicities in all parts of the city? Yes, 14%. No, 45%. Somewhat, 41%.
Okay, so that leaves us at 86% that are no or somewhat. Somewhat. So how come? What's been going on in the place where I live and work? What's been going on? What experiences can you share where you've been the target of racism? More inspiration. Thank you, Sharon. I say this inspiration loosely.
Thank you, Dr. Martin.
Okay, for those of you who said no or somewhat, could you share with us what it is that has had you say that? You can either post it in chat or you can raise your hand again.
Hey, Dr. Martin, we have Mario Martinez. Go ahead, Mario.
Thank you. Mario, are you with us?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear.
Hi.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, thanks for having me. Well, my experience has been that I don't necessarily feel like I haven't had any experience of racism towards me, but like in the public expressions of art or when you see the representation of the people within the city, like you don't feel, it doesn't feel as welcoming, because like when I go to old town, it's just like I see more white people, you know, and that's fine, and I love them. But what I'm saying, like, you don't feel like represented in the city, so therefore you don't feel as welcoming. But I don't feel like that they're racist to me. Like I don't feel unwelcome. It's just that it doesn't feel like, I come from New Jersey, from Jersey City, where you see a lots of diversity. So it just feels different. But I don't, you know, that's been my experience.
Okay.
Okay.
But I have an echo here. Mary, are you still online? Okay, I think it's gone now.
Okay, perfect. No other hands raised.
Okay. Sharon, this isn't on my script, but I'm curious, do we have a demographic break on the number of people of color in Scottsdale?
I didn't prepare that, but we do have that. If you would like me to share that, I can pull it up.
Okay, that would be, yeah, to Mario's point, you know, we are a tourist attraction and people will go to Old Town. So Mario, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I'm sure that New Jersey is a little bit different from Scottsdale, Arizona. Anyone else who said that to that poll, do you feel Scottsdale is welcoming for all races and ethnicities in all parts of the cities? And what experiences have you had where you might have been a target of racism? Now, just do a little quick an authenticity check. We've been in the middle of a pandemic. And so go back to some time before that, because that whole scene could have been interpreted in many other situations, having access to the vaccination or not having access to the vaccination is more like a systemic thing, perhaps. I don't want to get too much into politics or at all into politics, but I really do want people to be able to say in an authentic way, and you don't need to, you know, from this point on, if you don't choose to put your name in, just put your question in chat and we will, or your comment in chat, and we will hear your voice that way. All right, so let's flood chat with the experiences you've had when you've been a target of racism, or you've been a witness to it, or if you have identified something that was said to someone that was racist, anything that's like that. Let's just see your comments in chat.
And Dr. Martin, we have two hands raised, first from Lisa and one from Michael. First, Lisa. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi again. So as far as personal experiences, I know for a fact that my son was taking a friend of his home one night, and that individual lived in Scottsdale. They, he sat outside in front of the house for a little bit and just have a conversation. And an older white gentleman walked up to him and told him that he didn't belong there and that he needed to leave. Luckily, by the time I got there, the gentleman was gone. The other thing I'll say is what I've personally witnessed is, more so not necessarily direct racism, but more unconscious bias. First of all, it's 2021, and Scottsdale is still trying to approve an anti-discrimination act on really just basics, the basics, like, just non-discrimination in work. Being able to, let people feel comfortable and not have to worry about those things in a government setting, in a work setting. But as far as outside of those pretty common and basic areas that you wouldn't expect it, like just in your communities, it's still there. Also, I was in a venue where I had an opportunity to speak with city council in Scottsdale. I specifically asked them what they personally were doing to try to help promote diversity and inclusion within Scottsdale. What they did was they referred to the Anti-Discrimination Act, which is great. But again, that should have been passed probably decades ago. But they couldn't tell me personally what they were trying to do within their own homes, within their own neighborhoods, other than someone had mentioned that they had gone to Mexico once and noticed that they went to school too, which I thought was a little offensive. I continued to ask questions, and at some point they stopped handing me the mic. So again, I think that more so from my perspective, it's just a lack of awareness of that unconscious bias. But again, totally not going to discount the fact that there is probably more than likely, and there is an element of racism in Scottsdale, as there is pretty much anywhere you go.
Yeah. Some microaggressions in that conversation too, that I'm hearing you talk about. Yeah, got work to do, folks.
Dr. Martin, we have Michael Clack and then Maribeth Reeves.
Yes,
and we also got the slide for you. When we're ready, we can look at the demographic slide. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. Yes, I've been living in Scottsdale for 17 years now. I work for the city of Scottsdale. And when we first moved here 17 years ago, my wife went to register EJ, our son that I talked about earlier, into a middle school in Scottsdale. First question she was asked was, do you live in Scottsdale? And she said, yeah, or else I wouldn't be registering him. It was the tone and nature of the question. About a year or two later, there was an incident where a young lady that attended the school had lost her iPod. And of course, the parents were very upset, and they were after the school about finding the iPod and all of that. And the school had a policy that the kids weren't supposed to bring the iPod to school, period. It was a distraction. Well, on the bus, our son was riding home on the bus. He saw the iPod. Two other of his friends also saw it. They picked it up, looked at it, and then put it back down in the seat of the bus, and they left. Well, the bus driver reported that to the school when that subject came up, and then the vice principal decided that he was going to question all three of the boys about the iPod. And then he went and searched my son's locker. I asked if he had searched the other two boys' locker. He said no. And I asked, were they white? He said yes. And that's when I let him know that I had a real problem with that. He also followed the bus home from the school to where we lived at the time, and he said the reason he did that was because he felt like if he did have the iPod, he would come out of the house, walking around the neighborhood or whatever, and he would be able to see it. So I immediately began to think that maybe he had seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off too many times. And I talked to the principal, and I said, I have a real problem with that. the parents didn't follow the rules. And in my job, I have a lot of people that don't follow the rules, and they don't get what they want. And number two, doesn't your vice principal have more important things to do than follow my son home? So that was a real problem that I had. And that's why I say somewhat, because on the opposite spectrum, when I first came here, I was so impressed with the city of Scottsdale and the number of African Americans and people of color that were in executive positions when I came here at the time. And it was really a very pleasant surprise. And all the people that I interact with have been very good to interact with and all that. So that's why I say somewhat. I've had very good experiences here in the city of Scottsdale and in the community. And then there have been a couple of experiences where it wasn't as well as it should have been.
Right. Yeah, well, I keep saying we got work to do.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you had the wherewithal to go to that school and take a stand for your child for being profiled. The child was racially profiled. And that's the whole thing about an unconscious bias, that the unconscious bias, when you have an opinion or a preference or a racist, stereotype, and you act on it, and it's just totally unconscious. And what we can do is make the unconscious bias conscious, so that that person can then make a different choice. And we all have biases. Some hurt people, and some are able to be ignored, an idiosyncrasy, let us say. But the ones that hurt people, we as a community can do something about in raising awareness and taking a stand for our diverse community and the inclusion of it and being role models. All right, Sharon, you have that slide that answers the question of what are our demographics. And this is about the people who live here, correct?
Yes, well, I'm going to put that up, and we have one more hand raised from Mary Beth.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mary Beth.
Okay, so before, is it Mary Beth or Meredith?
Mary Beth.
Mary Beth, thank you. I'm looking at the slide now, and then we'll hear Mary Beth's perspective. It says this is about our community. 20% are of a different race or ethnicity, 1% Native American, 2% African American, 2% two or more races, 5% Asian, and 10% Hispanic or Latino. So thank you for that. We have a fairly small percentage of people who are of a different race or ethnicity. Thanks, Sharon. Okay, Mary Beth, can we hear from you, please?
Yeah, so I used to run a theater up in the North Valley, and I worked very hard to try to ensure that we were presenting works from different backgrounds and featuring artists of color in our work. But I can say that when we did Dreamgirls, several of my actors were stopped on the way up on Scottsdale Road. And it was noticeable. It wasn't something that ever happened to the white actors, but that they would be stopped for whatever reason, minor traffic, whatever. And it was very hard because I was, wanting to encourage them to come and feel comfortable and work in our community. And, they were dealing with that. And I've had some we were talking about some events leading up to just before the election. And the conversation was had about concerns for safety should the current president, the person that was in office, lose. And I said I had more concerns for my safety should they win. And I was, the term militia might be here was kind of said, and that made me very uncomfortable that that would be acceptable in any way, that we would accept that citizens could be there to, quote, protect us. And anyway, that was just personally, I felt kind of saddened by that. And yeah.
Yes. So we thanks, Mary Beth, for that, sharing what it was like for you to have a cultural event in Scottsdale and have the people who you were bringing in to bring joy to our audience, have them be racially profiled. So I can see why the data is what it is, that we are not, for the most part, I'm sure there, and I want to hear this too, there are some times when Scottsdale is not a welcoming community. And I understand why the stats are what they are. I've also hearing that some of our businesses are not particularly inclusive as well. I think one of our speakers said that. And the question remains, why? Why, and what do we do about it? You know, we can sit and be complacent and say, this is the way that it is. That's what Scottsdale has. And I mean, Scottsdale has a word called, you know, Scottsdale has its own reputation, good, bad, or indifferent. It has its reputation, and there's a heritage to be shared here. And there is a legacy to be developed. Obviously, being on the commission, being a commissioner myself, that's very important to me. I was turned out, and it's still important to me to have a robust community, that is welcoming for all and truly inclusive. Stuart, did you want to add something here? I see you have the comment, hands are being raised. I can't, Stuart, take it, you're on mute. You're on mute.
You would think I would have figured that out by now, right? One, thank you so much for bringing Dream Girls, or even having the concept of bringing it to Scottsdale. I appreciate the effort that took place, and obviously am saddened by the unfortunate events that took place there. There's a couple of things that I want to do to sort of muddy the water, perhaps. One is to expand the idea of diversity, and two is to expand the idea of ethnicity. And so when we say that Scottsdale is 80% white, what does that mean, right? Does that mean, I know as a former history teacher, et cetera, I know that doesn't mean that everybody is homogenous, right? And so even within that large number, there is diversity, and diversity of thought, diversity of LGBTQ status, diversity of gender, diversity of socioeconomic status, on and on and on, even diversity of ethnicity, which we very rarely talk about. There was a time in human history in the not so distant past where we were at a cusp where we were about to start to use hyphenated Americans. So Italian American, Irish American, et cetera, et cetera. And what ended up being was that we were just left with African American. And so what that really did was sort of help to perhaps create even more division, because when you talk about white or whiteness, we don't necessarily talk about it as a diverse group. We talk about it as one. And when we talk about persons of color, then that's where diversity generally comes up. And we don't necessarily mention the other variations of the variables that I just spoke about. So as the audience is sort of thinking about these issues, one, I want to start thinking about what whiteness means in that sense. And two, what are other aspects of Scottsdale where there are diverse populations and other aspects of the city that don't necessarily get talked about?
Good point. Thank you for that. Yeah, I know in doing my own share of demographic research, I think it's important to recognize that our Latino, Latinx, and Hispanic community is the only community that the United States has ever declared was not a race, it's an ethnic group. And for any of us know, we have Afro-Cubans, we have Puerto Ricans, there are Latinx, Hispanic, Latino community can be all races. So I'm sure that what you're saying, Stuart, bears credence along all racial categories. Thank you for that. So are you, Sharon, are you able to play the whole thing, or is that a screenshot?
That is just screenshot, Dr. Martin, and we do not have any other hands raised.
Oh, okay, very good, thank you. All right, folks, let's talk about reconciliation now. You were all sent out the link upon registering that took you to see this video, this TED.com, how to deconstruct racism one headline at a time. I found it a very wonderful presentation. It gave a different way of using language. You know, language is very, very important. And I'll tell you a little bit about Dr. Baratunde Thurston, excuse me. As a graduate of Harvard in philosophy, he discussed points of reconciliation by changing our words and our actions. So there was, could you go to the next slide for us, please? Thank you. So this is from the TED.com video. And he used some incredible examples that showed how if you can change the action, we can change the story, we can change the system, we can write a better reality, and we can choose to level up. I'd like, just curious, do we have anyone who has seen this video, that reviewed the video in preparation for being here today, that would like to speak to what Baratunde Thurston is saying? Do we have one hand?
Just waiting for a second, Dr. Martin.
Thank you. Don't forget, you can also use the chat.
Okay, we have one hand up.
Okay, who is that, please?
That would be Rachel Pearson. Go ahead, Rachel.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, I think in watching this video, one of the things that really struck me is just how often, not just related to racism, but any sort of difference that you may have with somebody, to sometimes recognize that if you simply changed a small element and thought about that person as if they were you, how would that change your reaction to this scenario? And it could be as simple as, I'm female and I'm speaking with a male, and would I have the same reaction to that male if what that person had said was a female? And I think sometimes it really causes you to recognize your own choices and the ways that we can react to people that are so unfair, and vice versa, things that you see other people do that you think, gosh, if I had been a man, I wouldn't have gotten that reaction. You know, no man would speak to another man like that, but they would speak to a woman like that. And so, you know, I think it relates to a lot of different ways that we interact with folks who are diverse from us, whether it is gender, whether it is race. And I think, you know, in watching this video, that really struck me as something that sometimes we have to step out of the situation, and almost like he did, if you'd only changed the name or changed the age or changed the race, how differently we would react. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. I got it. That's the same reaction that I had. And I was so glad that the HRC had asked us to view this. For those that viewed it, I'm sure that you must have some reaction as well. Is there anyone else that would like to chime in on this video?
Yes, Dr. Martin, we have Pam. Go ahead, Pam.
Thank you, Sharon. So I thought that video was fascinating, and just how a very little slight change can change the trajectory of a conversation, or certainly the outcome of a conversation. Mm-hmm. Prior to my move to Scottsdale, I worked for a small liberal arts college just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And we were going through some significant upheaval as an institution. And we had a very wonderful and wise man who came to serve as president in the interim position as we searched for a new leader. And there was a lot of consternation across campus between our athletic division and our athletes, specifically our football team, who were largely young Black men, and the group of people on the other spectrum who were fine arts majors or pursuing a fine arts degree and were in the fine and performing arts. Mm-hmm. And how they were kind of arguing with each other about what value do you bring? Why should we have athletes, you know, at this institution? And why should we have fine and performing arts? And this gentleman said to me, and it still sticks with me to this day, something very simple. He said to me, I think I'm going to take all of the athletes down to downtown Cleveland to experience a fine and or performing arts performance in all the culture that we had in Cleveland. And I'm going to take all the fine arts majors and the faculty members who think that there's no value to athletics to watch a practice and what the preparations they go through, and then take them to a football game. And I thought that was brilliantly profound, just to that when we step outside of our shoes and into somebody else's to try to gain that perspective, we can walk away from that experience so much richer than when we walked into it, because it's that simple shift in changing a perspective to fully understand what somebody else might be feeling. And those are just basic human emotions of having empathy for somebody else and trying to understand what's going on in their life. There are so many layers to us as human beings. And when we begin to take the time and the interest to peel those back, we see the commonality, and that is that we are all human beings.
Yes. Choosing for what we have in common versus our differences. Thanks for that story, Pam. That was really, really rich. Understanding with empathetic eyes and experiences, and then choosing. A lot of those unconscious bias, or the biases in general, are other automatic choice. And if we can choose the action, then we can change the story and change the consequences of our relationships. And yeah, we have the choice to create a better reality with everything that we've talked about up till now. We can choose to write a better reality. And Sharon, what would you like to add on this? Because you are the city of Scottsdale's diversity, equity, and inclusion person. You've been working behind the scenes so much to put this rich program together with our HRC. I'd love to have you speak what is so for you and what drives you and your passion to do what you do every single day.
Okay, in 2 minutes or less.
Yes, exactly, in 2 minutes or less, Sharon.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. I really appreciate the acknowledgement. And, you know, I think everything that everybody is saying is totally accurate. We know that evidence-based practices say that we have to develop empathy in order to understand somebody else's story. And I love what the Human Relations Commission has done to help the audience and our community understand that there's more to the story. In fact, we've done town halls around the danger of a single story. And certainly as an American Indian woman living here in Scottsdale, I love our city and our neighbors are fantastic. But I also know that I've had my own experience where I've had to, process it and recognize, that this microaggression that just happened to me in the community is something that is really creating a resilient mindset inside of me, because I've got to educate. We've got to create the spaces for a positive experience. And that's what we do at the city, is really try to create new spaces so our cultures can come together. We have a great list of diversity partners from our Asian American Pacific Islander community, our American Indian community, our Jewish community, our LGBT community. So we do quite a bit of things, and it's that kind of motion and interaction that helps create the synergy that the community needs for constant change. and keep us out of a complacency, right? And keep us growing and living in a world where we are respected, we treat with each other with kindness, that we empathize with one another, and most importantly, that we treat each other in a civil way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that so much. Everyone, what positive examples can you share that are about supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion and the spirit of community of Scottsdale as a Golden Rule City? What have you seen? Fill chat, raise your hand. Let's hear from you. Do we have any hands yet?
No hands yet?
Okay. So I'm going to flip it then. Is there anyone out here who would be willing to just stand in the future with me and think about out loud, Scottsdale? We know what we started with the riots. Now we've gone through racism and reconciliation. If you were to take a magic wand and say, this is the Scottsdale I would like to create, what would you create? What would be important to you?
Would you like to pull somebody from the audience and ask them directly?
I can't see faces. I only see about, let me see if I can get a view.
How about Ben Lane? Ben Lane, are you available to share some words? Oh, we've got Wendy, who has just raised her hand. And then if Ben, if you're available, great. If not, that's okay. Wendy, go ahead.
I see a few faces now. Okay, Wendy, yes. You're standing in the future with me. What do you see, Wendy?
Well, it's a little bit of getting there. I recently had some communication with a Michael Scott, who's a professor at ASU who does a lot on policing, I think, in criminal justice. And one thing I would love to see is something where our police departments, part of their training is having maybe psychologists, psychiatrists, some people who work with our officers to recognize their own bias. And I feel like if they use this body cam footage, that people could become, and even for all of us, like I try to be aware in my interactions with people, am I interacting with people different based on gender or where somebody's from or race or sexual orientation? And I have a vision of having our police be aware of biases in a real way using their own interactions, so that some of these things where people are getting stopped, you know, driving into a theater production might not happen as much or wouldn't be as
at all
scary and dehumanizing to people.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Equity, inclusion. Brian Hancock, I see you're here twice. What would you add to this? Anything?
Dr. Martin, Brian is actually our staff that is working behind the scenes. So he may or may not be able to join. Okay.
I gave a presentation before the Arizona Technology Council, and I have a lot of appreciation for people in IT. Brian, I don't want to take you away from your job.
Okay, how about Rachel Pearson? Go ahead, Rachel.
Thank you. Yeah, I think when I hear that question, I think about my own neighborhood a lot. And, you know, I love going for walks, and I wish that as I walked around, I just saw more people who didn't look like me. I wish that when I dropped my daughter off at school or picked her up, I saw more kids who did not look like her. I'd love to see more of that diversity in our community, in the families that are choosing to move to our community, and making sure that we as a community are making it feel welcoming for somebody who looks different to want to be here.
Oh, I love that. When you talked, Rachel, I was imagining going up to one of my neighbors with a welcome basket when they move in. And they may look out the window and see this African-American woman, and I don't know what they might be thinking, but my wish is that they say, well, thank you, come on in, let's have a cup of tea.
Exactly.
I hear you. I hear you. Thank you for that. Ben Lane, Stuart is mentioning your name. Yes, no?
Okay, we have Janice Shimo-Kubo.
Okay.
Go ahead, Janice.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear
Okay,
you.
perfect.
Fine.
So, Dr. Martin, when you talked about going up to the neighbors and bringing a welcome basket, I'm Asian American and I live way up in North Scottsdale, and I do that. And it's kind of interesting what you said, but it's also been lovely because it was an opportunity to get to meet people, and I did get invited to into their home, and she actually gave me something, and she was just like gushing over me coming over. So I guess what I wish is more of that. And back to the YouTube video, you know, the action. I think the action on a personal level, we all need to take responsibility. And so I'd love to see this world, the Scottsdale, where people are continuing to learn about other people and have a deeper understanding. And then I also like what the other woman said, Wendy, I believe, about systemic change.
Yeah.
That I like to see Scottsdale taking it very seriously, the leadership of working and chipping away at all the systemic layers and layers of things going on that we are breaking through. So that's my vision.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. Thanks, Janice. Stuart, did you, oh yes, you have to come out with this now. Oh, you have something like, I'm going to give you the big leap forward, 5 years, Stuart, give it to us. Scottsdale.
Oh, well, I want us to start at the beginning. And what's interesting is that I was just reading an article in Time magazine about Sesame Street. And, you know, Sesame Street to me I grew up with it. We were both born around the same time.
Right.
And to me, it's always been at the forefront of social change in a way in which I think is extremely subtle in a lot of ways. And so just by, you know, the mere idea of exposure, the idea of discussion, the idea of empathy, all the things that we've talked about, even with, you know, our whole theme of Scottsdale for All. And if you want to comment on Twitter, you can use the hashtag Scottsdale for All as we're having this discussion. We got to begin with the young people. You know, I pulled it up, and, you know, Sesame Street or Sesame Workshop did a study with, you know, NORC at the University of Chicago. Parents don't necessarily, you know, to Rachel's point, parents don't necessarily have a conversation with their young people about race. They, you know, we spend so much time, as I like to say, you know, covering them up in Charmin, you know, like trying to protect them, you know, giving them trophies for 15th place and those types of things, as opposed to exposing them in an age appropriate way to the world as it is, right? Yes, difference exists. Yes, change is different. My hair is different than your hair. My skin is different than your skin, but it doesn't mean better or worse. It just means different.
That's right.
And so, you know, I know we have a lot of educators on here, and if we can really start to begin with the schools, obviously that's where I would go, of course, but if we start with the schools and, you know, begin to increase the level of awareness on, you know, not just, you know, drive-by activism, like, hey, it's January 15th, we're going to celebrate Martin Luther King Day, and then not talk about it the rest of the year. You know, I mean, there's 179 other days in which we could talk about so many other people in school. And, you know, even beyond theme months, you know, I mean, I know our work with the Human Relations Commission, you know, we spent so much time with the anti-discrimination ordinance. Now that that's, you know, thankfully in the rearview mirror of being passed, now what do we do with that awareness to create more awareness, you know, having more town halls, you know, doing more things as we begin to come out of our bunkers and off Zoom and into, you know, into person, you know, what does that mean? And I really think we're losing a large opportunity if we don't include young people in that discussion.
I love that. That's great. Thank you so much, Stuart. Thank you. All right, folks, we're almost at the 1 minute. Well, we got 1 minute here, and You know, I've learned some great things in today's, and I'm really delighted to have been asked to be the moderator of this town hall meeting. It's been a while since I've had anything to do with the HRC. So you can invite me back. So I really enjoyed today. The good news, the bad news, it's a wake-up call for all of us, I trust, that we are citizens of a growing city that deserves to have all of our participations, deserves to have all of us be active activists, standing for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and belonging and sharing Scottsdale for all. So what's one thing, well, I will share, I've learned about a film that I want to watch. I've learned that I need to spend more time in Old Town, so Mario knows that he's not alone there, and there are other people who love that. We now that I have my double shots, a double shot vaccination, not tequila. So I've learned that there's some people here that care about making a change, that care about having a city where people belong, and that is Scottsdale for all. What have you learned? If you're on this with us, what is one thing that you learned today that you did not know or knew but now understand better? That last piece, so rich. What did you know? I mean, what did you learn that you did not know or knew but now understood better? Put your empathetic glasses on, your empathy. What do you now? How would you answer that question? Hands or chat, up to you.
No hands yet, Dr. Martin.
Okay. Well, everyone, I trust that you did learn something today. I trust that you do have greater empathy. We've had some really powerful people who have shared with us. Thank you to all who contributed. And please feel free to join us on Facebook, search Office of Diversity. That's the same. All right, let me do that again. Please feel free to join us on Facebook, search Office of Diversity, City of Scottsdale, to keep up with city diversity endeavors, news, or other community stories. For Scottsdale Human Relations Commission meetings, visit www.scottsdaleaz, all one word, .gov, scottsdaleaz.gov, and search Human Relations Commission